Your little title doesn't pay the bills. Patricia sneered, her voice echoing through the living room. I'm Lauren, 32, the new director of an architecture firm. It was a private gathering with 18 relatives watching in dead silence as my husband Brandon smirked. Instead of defending me, he grabbed my framed appointment letter and carelessly tossed it onto the floor by the shoe rack. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply stared at that shattered glass frame. I didn't need to scream, because I already held the one document that could ruin them. Weeks later, their perfect reputation would be permanently destroyed in front of 85 elite charity donors. This is that story. I know how it feels when your own blood treats your hard work like a joke. If you've felt this, please like, subscribe, and comment your location and local time. I read every single comment. Now, let me take you back to the night this all started. The smell of Patricia's expensive roasted lamb suddenly turned sour in my throat. None of the 18 relatives at the long mahogany table looked up from their plates. They just chewed, synchronized in their submission to the matriarch. Brandon returned to his seat next to me, smoothing his tie with the same hand that had just discarded my 7 years of sleepless nights. He poured himself more wine, his ring clinking against the crystal glass. I looked down at my lap, smoothing my wool skirt. My hands never shook. On the drive home, the silence inside the car was thick. Brandon kept his eyes on the road, humming a radio tune, completely unbothered by the heavy air. I stared out the passenger window, remembering an odd detail from Tuesday. I had mentioned to him that the bank unexpectedly stopped sending our physical corporate statements. He had simply brushed it off, claiming everything was digital now. I hadn't questioned it then. In our bedroom, the air felt even tighter. I had spent years curating this space, always yielding half of it to his exact comfort. But as Brandon climbed into bed, he immediately rolled over, presenting me with his cold, unyielding back. He didn't say goodnight. He never did when his mother was pleased with him. I sat on the edge of the mattress, clutching the heavy wooden frame of my director appointment. The glass wasn't broken. It was perfectly intact. Brandon believed he had buried his tracks completely. He forgot who I was. Every Tuesday and Friday morning for the past 6 months. The routine never changed. At exactly 6:30, before the sun fully cleared the oak trees in our front yard, Brandon would stir. He never kissed my forehead. He never checked if I was awake. He simply slid out from under the linen sheets, threw on his silk robe, and walked downstairs to stand by the front window. I watched him from the kitchen, my fingers wrapped around a mug of black coffee that had gone cold. He would wait for the blue mail truck to pull up beside our brick mailbox. The moment the carrier closed the little metal door, Brandon was already at the edge of the driveway, scooping up the letters before they could even settle. I used to tell myself it was just his obsessive nature, an extension of his mother's rigid discipline, where every schedule had to be monitored, every document scrutinized. When I complained about the sudden lack of paper statements from my firm's bank account, he smiled, poured me some orange juice, and told me I was stressing too much over corporate bureaucracy. He called it a digital transition. I believed him because when you share a bed with someone, your default setting is trust. You do not look at your husband and see a predator. But memory has a way of recontextualizing the small details when the truth begins to bleed through. 3 months ago, over a tense Sunday dinner, Patricia had spent 2 hours talking about her eldest son, Ethan. She spoke of his failed investments, not as reckless gambling, but as a tragedy of bad luck. She looked directly at me, her diamonds catching the chandelier light, and said that family means carrying each other's crosses without counting the cost. Brandon had nodded eagerly, reaching across the table to squeeze his mother's hand. They never asked for my permission. They just prepared the altar for the sacrifice. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 9. Brandon had already left for his office in the city, rushing out after a frantic phone call from his brother. In his haste, he left his silver keychain resting on the marble kitchen island. I picked it up. The small, notched brass key sat between his car fob and his office pass. My heart thudded against my ribs. A dull, heavy rhythm. I walked down the long gravel driveway. The morning air was crisp, stinging my lungs. The metal mailbox door groaned as I pulled it open. At first glance, it appeared completely empty. But I reached my hand deep into the dark metal cylinder, my fingers brushing against the very back wall. My nails caught on a piece of rough paper. I pulled it out. It was a standard window envelope from the Commercial Credit Union, half torn and jammed into the back hinge, forgotten in Brandon's daily sweeps. The logo on the top left corner belonged to my architecture firm's Capital Trust. My thumb tore the remaining seal. I pulled out the single sheet of paper. It was a final notice of overdraft protection termination. I skipped past the legal jargon, my eyes scanning down to the bold, ink-stamped figures at the bottom of the page. The account balance for my partnership buy-in fund was $42. $250,000 of my personal capital, saved over 7 years of grueling design work, was gone. The paper crinkled in my fist. My throat went entirely dry, the taste of ash rising from my stomach. He had not been guarding our privacy. He had been burning the trail of his own crumbs. My mind flashed to the massive Italian velvet sectional sofas delivered to Patricia's mansion last month. A lavish redecoration that perfectly mirrored the date of my scheduled corporate disbursement. Brandon did not wake up early to protect me from the world. He woke up early to ensure I remained blind while he picked my pockets. I folded the torn notice, sliding it deep into my coat pocket. The man I loved was not my protector. He was a thief in my bed. I sat at my sleek mahogany desk at Apex Architecture, the notice of my empty trust fund burning a hole in my mind. The large-scale fraud was airtight from the inside. To pull a full forensic audit on our corporate accounts, the commercial bank required a hardware security token and a physical co-signature. Brandon had taken both on his sudden 3-day business trip to Chicago. He had locked me out of my own life's work, turning the bank's strict security protocols into my personal prison. The realization that the man who held me at night had systematically orchestrated my financial ruin over 6 months left a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. The corporate line on my desk buzzed at exactly 11:40 a.m. My assistant didn't even have time to announce the caller before Patricia's sharp, raspy voice cut through the speaker. She didn't ask about my day. She demanded I sign the new personal guarantee papers for Ethan's secondary loan, which Brandon had left on our kitchen counter. Family means sacrifice. Lauren, she barked, her voice dripping with a lifetime of unchallenged authority. Ethan needs $40,000 by tomorrow morning. Your signature fixes this. Do your duty. I didn't raise my voice. I leaned back in my leather chair, my eyes fixed on the empty silver frame sitting next to my computer monitor. No. Patricia, I said, my voice dropping to a calm, icy register. I will not sign it. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end, followed by a torrent of venom. She promised to call our firm's biggest developer, a wealthy man she played golf with every Sunday. She promised to crush Apex Architecture, to turn my name into dust within the city's elite circles for my cold-hearted betrayal. I let her scream until she ran out of air. Then I quietly pressed the red button to disconnect the line. 10 minutes later, David, a senior loan officer from Horizon National Bank, walked into my office carrying a thick black leather binder. Horizon was our firm's largest institutional client, responsible for 60% of our commercial layout contracts. He dropped the binder onto my desk, sliding a government-authorized asset evaluation mandate toward me. The state was quietly preparing a massive distressed asset sweep, and they needed an independent, certified architecture firm to perform an immediate, confidential, structural, and financial appraisal of a high-value property entering default status, bounded by banking privacy laws. The owners had no idea their home was being inspected for liquidation. I looked down at the address printed on the first page of the legal mandate. 1200 Oak Crest Drive, It was Patricia's beloved colonial mansion, the crown jewel of her social standing. The bank was quietly initiating a pre-foreclosure audit due to 6 consecutive missed mortgage payments. David looked at me, apologizing for the short notice and the tight 24-hour deadline. I picked up my favorite heavy fountain pen, my fingers steady as I signed my name at the bottom of the acceptance sheet. I didn't tell David that I knew every square inch of that house. I just smiled, looked him in the eye, and accepted the authority. I finally had the keys to her castle. The heavy wrought iron gates of 1200 Oakcrest Drive hummed as they parted. I drove my silver sedan up the winding gravel path, the tires crunching softly against the pristine white stones. The colonial mansion loomed against the gray afternoon sky, an imposing monument of brick, glass, and white towering pillars. Patricia's longtime house manager, a quiet woman named Martha, met me at the grand double doors. She didn't look at my face. She only looked at the official authorization badge from Horizon National Bank, pinned to my wool lapel, and the heavy black leather folder in my hand. Patricia was out at her exclusive country club, securing final endorsements for her upcoming campaign gala. The massive house was entirely empty, silent, and vulnerable. I stepped into the grand foyer, the air smelling of lemon wax and expensive French lilies. My heels clicked rhythmically on the polished white marble. I walked straight past the formal living room, pausing only for a brief second to look at the massive Italian velvet sofas. The rich fabric was pristine, completely untouched, costing thousands of dollars that my architecture firm had earned through long nights of structural drafting and corporate negotiations. I ran my fingertips over the plush material. It felt freezing cold. Every single item in this room screamed wealth, yet every piece was bought with stolen breath. I moved into the mahogany-paneled library, setting my secure laptop on the massive oak desk. As a certified appraiser, operating under a strict bank mandate, I possessed the highest level of administrative access to the digital deed registry. I connected the encrypted network cable into the wall port. My fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced, cold precision. I bypassed the standard property descriptions and structural blueprints, diving straight into the deep financial history of the estate. The monitor glowed, illuminating the dark corners of the silent, suffocating room. The banking system loaded the secondary mortgage file from exactly 4 months ago. I zoomed in on the funding source line, tracking the digital routing numbers. The characters on the screen blurred for a fraction of a second before snapping into sharp, terrifying focus. The money used to prevent the bank's initial default notice on this mansion did not come from an inheritance, nor did it come from a family investment. The exact sum of $250,000 had been wired directly from the Apex Architecture corporate escrow account. I clicked on the attached PDF file containing the scanned KURC, the official mortgage agreement. My breath hitched in my chest. There, at the bottom of the legal document, sat my name, Lauren Vance. The cursive loops were elegant, mimicking my signature with uncanny precision, but the tail of the capital L was slightly too sharp. A distinct habit Brandon always had when signing his own name on formal documents. He had stolen my identity. He had stolen my life's work. He had signed my financial death warrant while I lay sleeping right next to him. The deepest pain did not come from the missing capital. It came from the timeline. The date on the document showed the forgery was executed on a rainy Thursday night in March. I remembered that night clearly. Brandon had brought home my favorite takeout Thai food, pouring me a glass of white wine and gently rubbing my shoulders as I complained about my corporate exhaustion. He had been smiling. He had been comforting me, all while he was actively planning to strip me bare. The man I shared my bed with had looked into my tired eyes and calculated exactly how to destroy my future. He didn't just pick my pockets, he watched me bleed and called it love. My hands did not shake. I stared at the forged signature on the screen, my jaw locking so tight it ached. Every piece of luxury in this house, every expensive suit Brandon wore, every single dollar funding Patricia's campaign gala tomorrow night belonged to me. I was bankrolling my own humiliation. They were going to stand before the city's elite, pretending to be protectors of the community. using my flesh to build their pedestal. I clicked the command to download the certified original K-IRC to my local drive to use as immediate legal evidence. Instantly, a bright red dialog box flashed across the screen. Access denied. Certified original document locked in central bank vault. Hard token biometric verification required for immediate extraction. Minimum processing time: 3 business days. My pulse spiked against my throat. 3 days. I did not have 3 days. Patricia's grand campaign gala was tomorrow evening at 8:30 p.m. If I waited for the standard bureaucratic approval, the event would finish. Her social standing would be cemented, and the funds would be laundered into her political shield accounts. The digital copy I held was enough for an internal inquiry, but it lacked the official seal required to trigger an immediate, enforceable asset freeze in front of witnesses. The system had blocked me. The clock was ticking down to 0. I closed the laptop, the screen going black, casting my own reflection back at me. I took a deep, slow breath, letting the cold air of the library clear the fury from my mind. If I couldn't bring the physical paper out of the vault in time, I would have to change the rules of the game. I would bring the vault directly to them. I pulled out my personal cell phone and dialed my assistant at the firm. "Sarah," I said, my voice completely flat, completely calm. "Open the master guest list for Patricia's campaign gala tomorrow night. I need you to manually add a VIP guest under our corporate architecture sponsorship slot." I paused, reading the name directly from the Horizon internal directory. Add Mr. Arthur Vance, Chief Fraud Investigator of Horizon Credit Union. Mark his invitation as urgent, personal, and highly confidential. I hung up the phone, sliding it back into my pocket. I looked around the empty, luxurious library one last time. They wanted an elite celebration. I was going to give them an unforgettable show. The grandfather clock in the grand foyer of 1200 Oakcrest Drive struck 8:30 p.m. Outside, a long line of luxury black town cars stretched down the winding gravel driveway, filtering 85 of the city's most prominent elite into the grand ballroom. Inside, the air was warm, thick with the scent of expensive French perfume, roasting vanilla, and burning beeswax candles. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the massive crowd, reflecting off diamond necklaces and polished silver trays. At the center of the room stood a large velvet-draped stage, surrounded by pristine floral arrangements that cost more than a standard monthly mortgage payment. I stood near the heavy oak entrance doors, clad in a tailored black evening suit, holding my dark leather briefcase close to my side. My eyes swept the room. These people did not care about the charity or the political campaign. They were here purely for the theater of wealth. And tonight, Patricia was the director of the play. She was dressed in a shimmering emerald gown, her posture regal as she glided through the crowd, accepting praises from city council members and wealthy real estate developers. She laughed loudly, her head tilted back, her hand resting heavily on the shoulder of her eldest son. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" "Lauren," the sharp whisper came from behind my left shoulder. I turned slowly. Brandon stood there, his tuxedo immaculate, but his forehead was slick with a thin layer of sweat. His eyes darted from my face down to the heavy leather briefcase gripped tightly in my right hand. He stepped closer, his body blocking me from the view of the grand ballroom, his breathing shallow and uneven. He looked at me with a volatile mixture of anger and deep suspicion. "You weren't invited to the VIP lounge," Brandon hissed, his fingers gripping my upper arm tightly. "My mother specifically told you to stay home. And why are you carrying a work bag to a black tie gala? What is your game?" I did not pull away. I did not blink. I looked down at his hand on my sleeve, then back up into his eyes. "I am here to represent my firm." "Brandon," I replied, keeping my voice down to a calm, steady murmur. "Apex Architecture is a corporate sponsor of this event. Remember, I have every legal right to walk through those doors." His grip tightened, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the briefcase. You've been too quiet since Tuesday. Lauren, no crying. No screaming about your trust fund. It's not natural. He reached out with his free hand, his fingers clawing at the brass latch of my briefcase. Open the bag. I'm checking what's inside before you take another step into this room. The external trap was sprung. If he opened the briefcase, he would see the certified Horizon National Bank foreclosure files and the digital scans of the forged mortgage documents. I had to give him a bone to chew on. A price to pay for my entry. I reached into my jacket pocket with my left hand, pulling out a small, silver digital voice recorder. I let it catch the bright chandelier light. Is this what you're afraid of? Brandon, I whispered, my voice dropping to a cold register. Were you worried I would record your mother's grand speech? His face twisted in sudden triumph. He snatched the silver recorder from my hand, his chest puffing out with immediate arrogance. I knew you were trying to pull some pathetic stunt, he muttered, tossing the device straight into a large brass trash can nestled beneath a massive floral arrangement nearby. He stepped back, straightening his bow tie, completely satisfied that he had disarmed my only weapon. Go sit at the back corporate table. Lauren, watch how a real elite operates. He turned on his heel, walking back toward the glittering crowd without looking back once. I squeezed the handle of my briefcase. The real files were untouched. The price was paid. I walked into the grand ballroom, moving silently past the rows of white-clothed tables until I reached the dark edge of the room. A sudden roar of applause erupted as Patricia walked up the steps of the main stage. Taking the microphone from a city official, she stood under the bright spotlight, the absolute epitome of high society grace. Thank you all for being here tonight. Patricia's voice boomed through the high-end sound system, filled with supreme confidence. Tonight, we do not just celebrate a campaign. We celebrate legacy. I am incredibly proud to announce the official launch of the Oakcrest Foundation, dedicated to uplifting our community's future. She paused, looking out over the crowd of 85 elite donors who all nodded in perfect synchronization. Brandon walked up onto the stage, standing proudly by her side, his arms slipping around her waist. This foundation, Patricia continued, her chin tilting upward, is fully funded by a private donation of $250,000. It is a sacrifice made from our own personal family savings, accumulated through generations of dedication and honor. The ballroom erupted into a massive standing ovation. People clapped fiercely, shouting their admiration. Patricia smiled, soaking in the adulation like wine, her chest rising with the ultimate false victory. She looked toward the back of the room, her eyes locking onto mine for a brief, cruel second. Her smirk was unmistakable. She truly believed she had won. She believed that by throwing my appointment frame into the dirt by the shoe rack, she had stripped me of my voice. What she didn't know was that the very title written on that frame director had given me the supreme legal authority to accept Horizon Bank's emergency liquidation mandate. I was not a defeated guest at her party. I was the authorized appraiser who held the legal axe above her neck. I sat down at my designated table, placing the heavy briefcase flat on my lap. I looked across the glittering room, away from the stage, toward the deep shadow of a marble pillar in the far eastern corner. Sitting there, entirely alone at a small round table, was a middle-aged man dressed in a sharp, slate gray suit. He did not applaud. He did not touch the champagne flute in front of him. He simply kept his icy eyes fixed on Patricia's laughing face, his fingers gently tapping against a thick manila folder. The stage was fully set. The actors were all in place. It was time to pull the curtain down. The applause rippled through the grand ballroom like a wave of mindless compliance. On stage, Patricia raised her hands, a triumphant smile stretching across her face as she prepared to deliver the final stroke of her theatrical victory. And now, her voice echoed through the high-end sound system. To officially receive this legacy pledge, I invite our honorary VIP guest to step forward. She looked toward the front row, her emerald gown catching the harsh spotlight, her eyes searching for the ultimate validation of her peers. Instead of the expected committee president, the middle-aged man in the slate gray suit stood up from his dark corner. He didn't smile. He didn't look at the crowd of wealthy donors who slowly turned their heads in confusion. He walked with heavy, measured steps straight toward the velvet-draped stage, carrying his thick manila folder. I rose from my back table at the exact same moment, gripping my black leather briefcase. The room grew strangely quiet, the ambient chatter dying down to a low, uneasy hum as the two of us converged on the spotlight. Brandon intercepted me at the base of the wooden steps, his face twisting into sudden panic. "Lauren, get back to your seat right now," he snarled under his breath, his hands shaking as he reached for my sleeve. "You are ruining her night. Security will throw you into the street." The man in the slate gray suit stepped between us, his massive frame completely eclipsing Brandon's posture. He didn't speak to my husband. He simply pulled a heavy leather wallet from his breast pocket and flipped it open, revealing a gold-crested institutional shield. "Arthur Vance, Chief Fraud Investigator for Horizon Credit Union," he announced, his voice carrying clearly without the aid of a microphone. "Step aside." "Sir." Brandon froze. His hands dropped to his sides, his mouth opening slightly as the color rapidly drained from his lips. We walked up the steps together, taking the stage under the burning glare of the spotlights. Patricia backed away from the podium, her regal posture fracturing into raw confusion as she stared at the official bank emblem. I opened my briefcase, pulled out the thick stack of financial appraisal documents, and laid them flat on the mahogany surface. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" Patricia hissed, her raspy voice cracking as she tried to maintain her dignity before 85 pairs of watching eyes. "This is a private campaign gala. You have no authority here." The investigator opened his manila folder, his eyes scanning the crowd before locking onto the matriarch. "As of 7:30 p.m. tonight, Horizon National Bank has initiated an emergency asset freeze on 1200 Oak Crest Drive." His voice boomed through the silent hall. "This estate is officially entering default status due to systemic mortgage delinquency and large-scale bank fraud." A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom. The 85 elite donors began to whisper furiously, their heads shaking. "The $250,000 pledge announced tonight is the direct product of identity theft and corporate escrow embezzlement," the investigator continued, sliding the scanned mortgage agreement toward her. "Your son forged his business partner's signature to secure the loan that saved this house 4 months ago. The bank is now executing an immediate, non-negotiable foreclosure mandate." The silence that followed was absolute. Patricia looked down at the paper, recognizing her son's distinct cursive loops mimicking my name. The truth exploded in her face. Her hand shook violently. The crystal glass of red wine slipped from her fingers. It shattered on the wooden stage. The dark liquid sprayed across her emerald gown like a fresh wound. Her jaw dropped, but no sound came out. Her knees buckled under the weight of her sudden ruin. She collapsed heavily against the edge of the mahogany podium, her hands clawing at the velvet drapes to keep from falling completely to the floor. She looked toward her wealthy friends in the front row, her eyes begging for help. Every single one of them silently turned their faces away, pulling their chairs back from the stage. Brandon staggered backward, his heels catching on the wire of a floor speaker. He looked at the investigator, then at me, his chest heaving as he tried to find his voice. "Lauren, please," he stammered, his fingers trembling as he reached out toward me. "It was for the estate. We can fix this. Talk to them." I looked at him, my expression entirely flat, my heart perfectly still. "The bank does not negotiate with thieves." "Brandon," I said, my voice echoing in the dead silence of the room. "And neither do I." 2 uniformed police officers stepped onto the stage from the side wings, their badges gleaming under the chandeliers. The 85 guests watched in utter shock as Brandon's hands were forced behind his back. The sharp, Metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the grand ballroom. The illusion of their empire was completely gone, shattered into 1,000 pieces on the stained floor. I picked up my briefcase, turned my back on the wreckage, and walked down the steps alone. The 85 elite guests vanished within 15 minutes. They did not offer condolences to Patricia. They simply scrambled for their luxury coats and vanished into the rainy night. The half-eaten lamb chops and flat champagne flute sat abandoned across the white linen tables. The grand illusion of the Oakcrest Empire dissolved into a messy clutter of trash, spilled liquid, and shattered glass. 2 officers from the white-collar crime division led Brandon down the back corridor. His head was bowed, the pristine fabric of his tuxedo jacket pulling tightly against his slumped shoulders. He did not look at his mother, and he did not look at me. The sharp, metallic rattle of his handcuffs was muffled by the thick carpet, but the sound cut through the silence with absolute finality. He was entering a world where his mother's name meant nothing. He was no longer a golden son, he was a federal liability. On the main stage, the fraud investigator stood directly in front of Patricia. Her emerald gown was ruined, stained dark red by the wine that had pooled at her feet. She held her breath, her fingers trembling violently as she dug into her designer purse. She pulled out the heavy brass ring holding the keys to 1200 Oakcrest Drive. With a stiff, robotic motion, she placed them into Arthur Vance's open palm. The house was gone. Her social standing, her political ambitions, her pride all stripped away in a single hour. By midnight, the flashing blue and red lights had faded from the winding gravel driveway. The investigators had packed their boxes, leaving behind a heavy, suffocating silence that filled every square inch of the colonial mansion. I stood completely alone in the center of the grand foyer. Bright yellow bank foreclosure notices were already taped across the mahogany double doors. The gold trim on the walls seemed duller now, stripped of the artificial light and the sycophantic praise. I looked down at my hands. They were perfectly steady. The $250,000 would be returned to my firm's corporate escrow account by Monday morning through a federal court mandate. Brandon would face 5 to 10 years for grand larceny and bank forgery. Patricia would spend her remaining years in a cramped 2-bedroom rental, her name permanently blacklisted from every elite circle in the state. Justice was Ranmech. It was absolute. But as I listened to the hollow echo of my own breathing in the dark, a cold, sharp realization settled deep into my chest. The battle was finished. The enemy was neutralized. But the silence in the massive hall was terrifying. I was completely free. But I was entirely alone. I picked up my briefcase and walked out into the cold night air, ready to face the empty space waiting for me on the other side of the city. The movers left at noon on a crisp Tuesday morning. My new penthouse apartment smelled of fresh paint, polished glass, and absolute silence. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, slicing across the bare hardwood floors. High above the city traffic, the air felt lighter, stripped of the heavy tension that had choked my lungs for 6 months. I knelt beside the last cardboard box, slicing the packing tape with a utility knife. I reached inside and pulled out the heavy wooden frame of my director appointment certificate. The corner was still slightly scuffed from its night on the floor beside Patricia's muddy shoe rack. I took a clean white microfiber cloth, sprayed it with glass cleaner, and carefully wiped away the smudges until the glass reflected the open skyline. I stood up and hung it securely on the accent wall, directly above the center of my bed. The gold ink of my title caught the afternoon sun. It was the only ornament in the room. I unfolded a brand new set of charcoal linen sheets, smoothing them over the mattress with slow, deliberate strokes. I slipped a fresh cover over the first goose-down pillow, fluffing it before placing it dead center beneath the framed certificate. Then, I reached into the linen box and pulled out the second pillow. I held it in both hands. The fabric was pristine, soft, and completely empty. For 7 years, I had bent my posture, my finance, and my schedule to accommodate another person's presence. I had yielded half of my life to a thief, believing that building a home required an endless stream of silent compromises. My hands did not shake. I carried the second pillow across the room, opened the matte black trash can by the doorway, and dropped it inside. It hit the bottom with a dull, heavy thud. I pressed my foot down on the pedal, letting the lid snap shut with a sharp click. The space on the right side of my bed was now a clean, beautiful void. No one would ever sleep there again. No one would ever have the keys to my mailbox, my corporate trust, or my peace. I walked back to the window, looking out over the city that my firm would help redesign. The price of my power was absolute isolation, and I accepted it gladly. Love isn't a debt you pay by letting them pick your pockets.